the last quarter moon in Taurus, 11 August 2020, is what I'm going to be speaking about today. Antiochus of Athens in the Thesaurus, which is translated by Robert Schmidt in conjunction with Project Hindsight. He says here that why is it that when you have, let's see, in the place that the moon's exalted, so that's Taurus, you have nothing that's depressed. And he says it's because the moon is the fortune of all. Again, is this theme of what so goes the moon, so goes everything. I also want to go to Isabel Hickey, this famous astrologer from the 20th century. Her book, Astrology, A Cosmic Science. And she says here that when a planet is exalted, that planet has this harmonious potentiality in that sign, and it can be used to its best advantage. And it's an expression of that planetary energy in its highest form. When a planet travels through the sign that it's exalted in, it's kind of the highest form of that planet's expression. You know, remember, the planet doesn't have responsibility in that sign. The domicile ruler is the one that's ultimately responsible. And so that planet gets kind of to transit through scot-free, not having to worry about things except for enjoying that energy of its nature and that harmonious energy. And the dictionary here, Oxford Languages, says exaltation is either a feeling or state of extreme happiness, so a rapture, a joy, an elation, or it's the act of elevating someone in rank or power. And I think with the astrology, we're really thinking more about that second definition, that you raise a planet up in rank when it transits through the sign of its exaltation. But I think the planet that's being raised up certainly would feel something like happiness or joy or rapture. When I put this into Google, it actually gave me a link to ecstasy, the emotion ecstasy. And ecstasy is actually very similar to this first definition of exaltation, which is a joy, a rapture. I was thinking of the sculpture by Bernini, the sculpture in Rome, the Ecstasy of St. Teresa. But it's this idea that the spirit can sort of be exalted when it connects to these sort of divine energies. The sexual energy, the life force being maybe sublimated or converted into this divine raising up. Maybe a way to look at the exaltations and the signs of exaltations are that the planets can access more easily this exalted kind of ecstatic state, this higher octave. This is what this last quarter moon in Taurus is. It's exalted in Taurus, and there's a lot to like about the moon in this chart. It's receiving an overcoming trine from Jupiter in Capricorn, an inferior sextile from Venus in Cancer, and it's mutually received by Venus. There's no hard aspects to the malefics, Mars or Saturn, or the lunar nodes. Going to this higher octave or this higher spiritual kind of threshold that we can walk through when the moon's in this sign. The home and can be this place of great spiritual nurturance. And you know, I have here splaying out in the home and luxuriating, really resting in the home space and letting the home nurture you. Hope is another thing. Because of the Venus and the Jupiter, the two planets that signify hope and expectations for the future, are giving these nice, easy aspects to the moon. Now the world's in a crisis. People's lives are in a crisis. A lot of uncertainty in the world. And this lunar transit through Taurus can really give us a sense of like, what is the hope for the future? What are things we want? And the home space can be kind of this protective cocoon to allow for those meditative projections into the future, those positive projections. You know, why is the moon exalted in Taurus? The moon, the mother, home, nurturing. Venus, the ruler of Taurus by domicile, is pleasure, relationships, arts. Venus is about adornment of the body. So it's focused on that body and making the body look beautiful. The more safety one feels and comfort, the more they can relax into ease and feelings of pleasure and ease. Both Venus and the moon are also of the night sect, and they signify activities of the night. That is things like home, relations, comfort, nurturance, sex. We can kind of read the night sect planets together, and particularly the moon and Venus together, and think about things we do at night when we return to our homes after being out in the world. We come home to get our needs met in the home environment. And both the Venus and the moon are really directly related to that process. This particular quarter moon is that fire and earth are strong elements represented in the sky. And that cardinal energy still has the most placements right now. The 9 traditional planetary points that we look at, that's the lunar nodes and the 7 traditional planets. When you're hot, think about that hot summer day, you're laying in bed, maybe the AC is not working, you just got a sheet on, you take the sheet off. it's still hot, you might get up and get out, go find some water to drink. So that heat can kind of spark action. And I think about a fire burning from wood, right? That's earth and then fire. And that kind of fire at night can give us life. It gives us, sustains us with heat and light. We're in a waning moon cycle. There's some overlap with the waning cycle significations and the night sec significations. So this is the idea that during a waning moon, we want to do activities to stopping or slowing down. And there's this great kind of lessening of the growth cycle that happens during a waning moon. And that's what happens at night, right? You think about, you wake up, you go into the world, you do your business, and then you come home and you're lessening, you're relaxing, you're winding down. People often talk about, how do you wind down after work? Well, this is what the night sec and the waning cycle can signify. It's this kind of winding down. And I want to say here, all benefics and malefics in cardinal signs doesn't happen very often. And that's what we have right now with Venus in Cancer, Mars in Aries, and then both Jupiter and Saturn in Capricorn. And the last time that took place was earlier this year in 2020, just as the coronavirus fears were starting to really grow. So you have that period, but then the time before that, when you had all benefics and malefics, those 4 planets in cardinal signs, was in 2011. And this was a really dynamic time. I remember this weekend. Osama bin Laden, it was announced that the U.S. Navy SEALs had killed him, so it was reported, that death was reported. But you also had the wedding of Will and Kate, and then there was a ceremony at the Vatican, a beatification ceremony of Pope John Paul II was held on the 1st of May during that weekend. So it was a really dynamic time. A lot was happening in the world with the symbols, these important symbols of the Western world. And we just entered into that phase here when on 7th August when Venus entered Cancer. I always like to check in with the markets because they are numbers. We can just kind of assign a number to a transit, and they give us a lot of information that's objective in a certain way. But during the last time that all malefics and benefics were in cardinal signs, you had tops in the stock market. So the top in May 2011. This was 2nd May 2011. That was a local top in the stock market. It didn't return to those highs until I think later that year into 2012. And then earlier this year, we had a local top on 19 February 2020. So this cardinal dynamism where the benefics are facing off against the malefics and these initiatory cardinal signs can really, at least the last 2 times, has shown a turn of direction in the price of stocks. We'll see what happens this time, but the market has currently been rallying since the March lows pretty significantly. We'll see if the pattern holds. I mean, I'm not predicting it will. I always just like to offer correlations and more out of curiosity, see how they unfold. This is Paul Krugman's New York Times article from 7 August. Paul Krugman says that we seem to be headed for a greater recession worse than the financial crisis. So it's hard for me to believe that if that's true, that market can sustain these high prices. Anything's possible. It's a crazy, crazy time and a crazy, crazy year. Okay, so during this lunar quarter, I'm going to look at 3 aspects. We're going to look at the 16 August Mars trine Sun. We're going to look at the 17 August Mars trine Mercury, and then the 17 August Sun conjunct Mercury. Leo and Aries will be taking center stage at the end of this lunar quarter because you have the domicile ruler of Leo is in Leo, so the Sun is in Leo, and Mars is in Aries. I want to turn here to Kevin Burke. He's got a great book called Astrology, Understanding the Birth Chart. This is actually the book I recommend for all beginners. But in here, he writes about fire signs being the, fire, that fire element being the energy of life and spirit. It's outgoing, energizing, transforming, action-oriented. So we're going to have planets and fire signs making these dynamic aspects with the rulers of those fire signs involved in those aspects. And it's really a dynamic, action-oriented time. And of course, it's interesting because you have to juxtapose that fire energy with this waning moon cycle and all of the moon Venus, right? Pick your fighter. You might be more inclined to that rest phase, and actually that might be what you need if it gets a little too fiery. Or you might need to use that fire and maybe kind of work against that waning lunar cycle. So let's start off here. Mars will be trining the Sun. This is on the 16th of August, late in the early afternoon or mid-afternoon Central European time. Mars in Aries will be overcoming the Sun in Leo via trine. And usually we don't think of malefic planets as really doing harm when they make a trine. I don't, at least. I think of, especially with Mars having so much dignity, that this is actually really supportive for the sun. This is an enhancement. It's an aspect of enhancement. And I wanted to meditate or just consider what actions can you push into or follow through on with this burst of fire. There's going to be a really nice opportunity on these 3 days to really push into some of the things that you've committed to and that you want to follow up on. So think about that now. How are you going to use that energy in that space? The Mars trine Mercury, which happens the next day, it's less than 24 hours later on the 17th, that Mars and Aries will be again overcoming Mercury via this trine. The other thing about this moment is that Mercury will be in the heart of the sun. It will be supercharged, injecting its fire straight into Mercury. You can think about like an injection of adrenaline. I think about that scene of Pulp Fiction when Mia Wallace has had a drug overdose. They inject the adrenaline right into her heart, and she pops awake. This is the kind of power of a being in the heart of the sun for any planet. Mercury is going to be receiving that, and so I think with this transit, it's a time to talk about your goals, your passions, the movement ahead. But I think when you combine the two together, you can really think about projecting yourself and your identity out into the world using that mercurial tool set during and then being pushed by the power of Mars, which is that action planet in Aries. Of course, it's fire season, but we're seeing a fire theme emerging. Pine Gulch fire update. There was residents ordered to evacuate. See, this is coming from 9 August, so it's just a few days ago. So there's a fire in Colorado. Let's hope that that dissipates. And then these Amazon fires, I don't know if you remember those from last year, but there was an international outrage about them last year. Well, this year's dry season, according to the Washington Post, has started out even worse. And so we'll see what happens with the Amazon. I'm hoping that this stuff can kind of, be tempered by Saturn and Capricorn, that cold Saturn. Anthony Lewis, in his book Horary Astrology, Plain and Simple from 1998, he talks about cazimi. Cazimi just means when a planet conjoins the sun, in the heart of the sun. Those are synonyms. Authors consider that planet to be fortified or greatly strengthened, Anthony Lewis says, and I like that. I like that delineation. This comes from Rhetorius the Egyptian. I think it's one of the earliest mentions of a planet being in the heart of the sun. This is from the 6th century, and this is Holden's translation, but he talks about its force. A planet having force is the noun he uses here when it's in the heart. And this is where we get the 1 degree orb, that if a planet is within that 1 degree, that it has greater force because of the sun's power. Morning, you have the Mars trine Mercury. The day before, you have Mars trine Sun. And then on the mid-afternoon, on the 17th, you have the Mars, or the perfection of the Mercury in the heart of the sun, talking about passion. Sometimes it's just good to sit down. This is what I love. Why do I love this? Or writing it down. I love these things. Or even reminiscing about the past when you were, enlivened by an activity or a person. But thinking about bringing that into a thought form or a linguistic expression can really crystallize that passion. So I have here writing binges, magical preparations, business activity, during the conjunction or during that period of a 1 degree orb. It's usually a few hours. Maybe you can initiate some business activity that you've been waiting on. The other thing to like about this is that, Saturn is not making any aspect to the conjunction. And so you have this kind of safety. Mars is there in an easy aspect, a positive aspect. The other thing about this Mercury in the heart of the sun moment, the fixed star Subra is in the mix here. It's within 37 degree minutes of this conjunction. And Subra is in the knee of the lion. Subra is that knee joint of that dynamic, moving, roving lion. I just think this actually adds some tone to the moment here, because remember, fire is action, and we have a fire-dominated sky, but the knees are necessary for movement. Those knee joint movements are essential to everyday activities: walking, running, sitting, standing. This is from a website, innerbody.com. But just think about it. If your knees go out, you can't walk. Mercurial signification of sports and games are something to look into. If you have some free time, if you can get outside where you feel safe and comfortable, do some running, do some just walking even. And here's an article from July 31st, the Daily James Online, an onslaught of sports set for August. And I find it with this Mercury Sun moment that all of the sports that were backlogged from earlier in the year are now are back. All right, so this is the last several times the Mercury and the Sun have conjoined in this degree, which is the 26th degree of Leo. And you have 1978 and in 1941, you had conjunctions in this same degree of the Sun and Mercury. Let's just start with 1941. It goes without saying, you pull up anything about that date and it's all World War II. Our current moment is quite locked in with that, right? There's all of this war analogy with COVID. So here's an article, every citizen must fight the COVID war. This is from India, from Bengaluru. From 6th of August, North Korea must step up its war on COVID-19. It's all about this war analogy. North Korea is stepping up its war on COVID-19. We have here also that an article from theconversation.com this week was comparing the birth during an emergency. It was talking about the Second World War and coronavirus and how these emergencies have affected birth rates. So again, harkening back to the World War II moment. And so this Mercury-Sun conjunction in 1941, it really does speak to our current moment, that there's some these direct analogies happening in the media. There's a sense here of an ongoing crisis, just like in 1941 when this happened. This was in the early phases of that war period. It didn't really come to an end until 1945. And I feel like there's a sense of that now. And this was a tweet I had made from November 2018, where I explained that starting in 2023 and completing in 2026, all of the outer planets will change signs. The modern outer planets, Saturn, Pluto, Jupiter, Neptune, and Uranus, the outer planets will be in those final signs by 2026. And so it lines up with French astrologer André Barbeau, who predicted this crisis. He said there will be a pandemic in 2020. He said it will then trigger a larger crisis, and that crisis doesn't end until 2026, though he said 2025 would really be an uptick where things would be better. This outer planet sign change analysis combined with the Barbeau predictions, combined with some of these other hits to 1941, particularly the Mars retrograde, the Sun, Mercury in the heart of the Sun, and other transits they continue to underscore for me this idea that we're in the middle of a crisis that's going to continue for a while. We go to the 78 date, so this is 1978. So Pope Paul VI died on 6 August 1978. The papal conclave happened later in the month after the Sun-Mercury conjunction, and then on 26 August, Pope John Paul I succeeded Pope Paul VI. The thing about this is that Pope Paul I didn't last very long, I think something like 33 days. But this happened during this 1978 period, and I had seen this story. Former Pope Benedict is seriously ill, a German newspaper claims, and he just made a trip to Munich. Actually, that's where I am right now, so it's kind of strange, all of the synchronicity with the Vatican and the astrology, and I'm in Munich. He was at the Munich airport on 22nd June, and he's suffering from shingles. His voice is barely audible, so maybe there's going to be some activity here. Look, Benedict, I never wish ill on anybody. I'm going to send him good energy. May he get well. The final thing I want to check in here on, looking at some transits over this next quarter, but I want to just introduce the mansions of the moon, the lunar mansions. Many of you know what these are. A lot of you may not, or some of you may not. But the lunar mansions are a lunar zodiac, effectively, and we divide the 360 degrees of the ecliptic into 28 sections of 12 degrees and 51 minutes each. And this division originates in certain fixed stars being assigned to segments of the sky. And they were initially irregular in size, but by the medieval and the Renaissance, we have this kind of regularization of a tropical zodiac with 28 lunar mansions. You find in Vedic astrology, the nakshatras, they have 27 lunar mansions based on a sidereal zodiac. This site is excellent. I want to recommend it, lunarium.co.uk. It's a site that really goes into the lunar mansions. It's not a substitute for reading the actual original texts. I encourage everybody to do that. But there's nice stubs by many different authors for each lunar mansion. And so these are the two transits I want to bring into focus. 16 August. So this is before that fiery kickoff late in the lunar quarter that we've already discussed. But before that, you have the moon in Cancer in its domicile being bona fide by enclosure between Venus and the rays of Jupiter. So the moon will be separating from a conjunction with Venus in Cancer, but applying to an opposition with Jupiter in Capricorn, a 1-2 combination. Where earlier on the 16th we have the conjunction with the moon and Venus, then the moon separates and starts applying to Jupiter within 7 degrees. It's bona fide. So there's a real opportunity to have the home as a place of safety and defense from harm and defense from that cardinal dynamism. You know, resting into the home, relying on the home, coming back to the home if you need to gain like a battery, recharge your battery. But then the second phase is going to be that fiery expression of pushing out with that Mercury cazimi and those Mars trines. And so here's what the lunarium site can give you. So for example, as the moon becomes bona fide, it will be in the lunar mansion 8, Al Nathra. And this is good for love, marriage, family life, friendship, according to the site, achievement of a goal, travel, healing. It's actually one of the better lunar mansions. It's one of the best spots for the moon. Unfortunately, that's only for like an hour during this bonification, because as soon as the moon crosses into 12 degrees, 51 degree minutes Cancer, the moon will enter the 9th lunar mansion, Al-Tarf, which is good for defending yourself from attacks. And I actually like how these work together, because it's like getting set up in the home, established in your love, in your relationship, in your family life, in your friendships, and then settling in for attack. You know, we need to set up our supports, expand our supports, and then hunker down. But there actually is great difficulty for this lunar transit in Cancer, but it sets up with this real opportunity to kind of get your position right in terms of the protections that you're going to need. This is that transit I'm just referring to. Right in the early morning on the 16th, you have this bona fide moon, but by the evening, so by 9:30 on the 16th, and this is Central European time, so by the evening in Europe, you're going to have this really kind of messy T-square with the moon, Mars, and Saturn. So the moon will be maltreated because it will be carrying the light of a square from Mars and then applying to an opposition with Saturn. You can even have the home become a challenge. You know, that the nesting, it might be like, hey man, I've been nesting here too long. Get me out of here, get moving. I want to just say here, the Vatican used this Vatican theme of this lecture. This was from the Australian Church, urges people to really think about mental health when we're dealing with COVID-19 and the lockdowns, the fear of getting exposed, you know, all of the stuff that's happening, the political tension. There's a mental health price to pay, and that cardinal dynamic axis that's being activated for the rest of this year. I think the mental health is going to continue to be under pressure. Exercise, drinking water, just the basics, you know, get your basics right. And I think that can really support the mental health. And with Mercury in the heart of the sun, you know, the talking about what you're going through is really going to be important also, I think, to support the mental health during this time. Cardomancy pull, this is the 9 of spades, the anguish card. This is Mars in Gemini, particularly Gemini being an air sign. It's more about thought. It's more about technology, communication, talking, you know, but the air side of that, which could be writing, speaking, you know, we talk, the words go through the air. And when Mars gets there, this could feed into real negativity with the thinking or with the words. And I think about arguments out loud. I don't know if you guys have seen all these videos online with like people confronting people or yelling and fighting. This year has been full of those kind of clips around social media. To me, that's Mars and Gemini. It's when you start yelling and screaming. The anger has to come out, and it comes out through the thought and through the word. The other part is that self-punishment, that self-flagellation with the self-talk. And so anytime I see this card, I think just lay down. And Mars, we usually think of action, but I think it actually wants inaction here, and then disengage from the thinking. So try to get into the body. You know, and even, you know, whether it's laying down or even walking, just feel the feet as you step to get out of the thought, because the thought can be so damaging. And as always, you can book a donation-based reading with me, Astrology for All, sjanderson144.com. I look forward to reading for you. This audio is on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Find them there. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at sjanderson144.